guest today has been a hostage negotiator, associate psychologist, and now oversees state hospitals in Texas for those experiencing mental illness. This is going to be a fascinating podcast, I promise. Hello, my name is Chester Elton, and with me is my co-author and my dear friend, Adrian Gostick.
Well, thanks, Jess. Yeah, today we're going to learn some tactics to reduce anxiety and build wellness from an expert in mental health and leadership. As always, we hope the time you spend with us will help reduce the stigma of anxiety at work and in your personal life.
And with us is our friend Scott Shacklin, Deputy Executive Commissioner for the Texas Health and Specialty Care System, where he is responsible for overseeing the operations of 10 state hospitals and 13 state-supported living centers. Scott has a law degree from Texas Tech University School of Law and a Master of Education degree from Texas Tech University. Scott, I'm delighted to be with you again. Thank you so much for finding time to be on our podcast.
Thank you. I'm very excited about it.
Well, we're thrilled to have you, Scott. So talk a little bit about what you're seeing in your role overseeing state hospitals that worry about people's mental health, especially as now we're in this post-pandemic world. What are you seeing big picture?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the things that we're seeing, when we were in the middle of the pandemic, there was a lot of stress on people, obviously. And as we went through things like lockdowns and businesses and people leaving employment, things like that, as we kind of started coming out of the main part of the pandemic, that's where you kind of get the trauma that people have experienced. And so whether it was isolation for some folks, whether it was just the stress, the political and psychological stress around us, what we're seeing a lot is people now starting to, you wear that, you keep it on you. And so as they are now starting to recognize that, I think we're seeing an uptick in people that are seeking services and people that need services, and they need to connect with others. And it's kind of funny because I think we've gotten so used to over the last 2 or 3 years being more virtual, being more isolated, being kind of on our own, that now a therapist for some people or a mental health professional is almost replacing something they may have previously had because they've lost a lot of those connections. And so it's really allowing them to, we're seeing that the need for people to really process what's happened in this world and where we're going to go from here, the fear of the future.
Right. Are you finding there's a little less of a stigma in asking for help and having a counselor and so on since the pandemic?
I think so. It's kind of hard to tell. I think you'll see that in age groups, especially. I think people that are younger and have had a more of an openness about their mental health challenges. I think social media, with all the negative aspects about it, also has a positive aspect where people are openly talking about, like I'll see people post, I saw my therapist this week and we talked about this, and you didn't used to do that.
Never.
And, but I think also with others, there's certain demographics, whether it's people that are grew up in an era where you just pull yourself up by your own bootstraps or whatever. They're not necessarily seeking those services as much as others. So
right.
I think you're always going to kind of have that generational piece there.
Yeah, well said. When I was with you, you spoke about working to enhance recruiting and retention of your staff. I mean, your staff does some pretty hard jobs. Yeah. Can you talk about what you're doing that's working to enhance the wellness of your own staff across the great state of Texas?
Sure. And I've always tried to do that divide of recruitment and retention, because recruitment really is about taking care of your own, and it's about creating a culture and an atmosphere in which people are comfortable and they feel that they belong to something. One of the things that has been the biggest challenge for me, because we have, first of all, I'm sure everybody knows Texas is huge. If you don't, get a map out. There's even websites where you can put Texas on top of like Europe and see how it's, but, having 10 hospitals and 13 state-supported living centers, we are spread from El Paso, which is not even in the same time zone as me, all the way across to East Texas. Trying to keep all those folks engaged really is on 2 levels. One is locally. I mean, there's nothing that says that's stronger than have good local leadership that's doing things daily with them to try to create a culture of respect, a culture where people feel engaged, but also from the state level, because there's always kind of been this, the state office people are in the ivory tower. They don't know what's really going on out here. So we've tried to do a lot from a state level also to send a message to people that they matter. And so some of the things I've done, I have, for example, we started a podcast that's solely for our staff, and it allows them to, what I do is I interview people from different hospitals and SSLCs that either have been nominated or people have seen things they've done. We have this initiative we call Together We Shine, which is really about how we can work together and do things that are not just part of your regular job, but when you see people go above and beyond. And to me, that's important because, and I'll give an example. We had a housekeeper that was on one of our units, and she noticed that one of the people receiving services there was in some kind of crisis, and she didn't really have time to run and get people. She yelled, and they were coming down the hall, but she immediately started doing CPR on him. She's a housekeeper. That's not her regular job. But you know what? Saved a life, made a difference. And so what we try to do is talk to those folks and tell others, we're all taking care of patients. We're all taking care of residents. And to me, that gives you that greater sense of purpose, because you feel like you're part of something more than this, the daily grind of coming in, doing your job and leaving. And so with that, we have a magazine that we started where we feature people and we send out, we have a newsletter. We have, like I said, the podcast that we're doing. I also do virtual town halls where people can log on. And the most fun with the virtual town halls is not really the first part where I tell them what's going on. It's the last half hour, they get to rapid fire questions at me. And so, and keep in mind, I have 18,000 employees. So these aren't a few people. Wow. And so what happens is I start getting all these questions, and it's everything from the normal, are we going to get any pay raises this year, up to, what are your thoughts about this or that? But I think what it demonstrates to people is that we're human. We all are. And that we're all kind of doing this together. We have a common mission. And so when I talk to, because with facilities, you have your clinical staff, you've got doctors, nurses, dentists, pharmacists, and everything, but you've also got maintenance, food service, housekeeping, all those people. And so making sure they all feel that. And housekeeping, I mentioned specifically because I will tell them, you're not just cleaning a unit, you're helping create a therapeutic environment. And that's important because you're part of it. And that really has helped us to have a good, I think, a good culture where people feel like family. And I want them to feel that way. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into trauma stuff, if we do. But yeah, I think that's an important piece of what we're doing.
Well, that's a good transition. Let's talk a little bit about trauma then. With your background, as Chester says, you've worked as a treatment coordinator for Center for Youth, associate psychologist in Lubbock, and a hostage negotiator for 2 psychiatric prisons. You've had some interesting background. So tell us a little bit what you've learned about anxiety, trauma, and maybe some lessons that you've learned along the way that can help all of us thrive.
Well, I learned, it's interesting because the hostage negotiation piece, which people always find fascinating, and it was, we had one very serious situation out in Lubbock where we had a hostage, a lady that was taken hostage by 2 inmates, and it lasted about 11 and a half hours. Wow. It was exhausting because you can't go home and sleep. You're there, you're in the middle of it. And it worked out okay. But when I came out of that room after 11 and a half hours of this, the first thing I did is I went to the office there at the prison, and I called my kids because I just needed to hear their voice. And at the time, I didn't realize, it was much later, that's a kind of a normal trauma response, is to reach out to someone that, and to know to feel stability, to feel there's something there. The field has advanced a lot since then, and we talk a lot about trauma-informed care, and we really have worked to make sure that the services we provide are trauma-informed, because many of our patients and residents have had some pretty bad things that have happened. But the staff, there's the old saying, and I always bring this up because it gets on my nerves, when people say, leave your problems at home. When you come to work, leave your problems at home. Well, we don't work that way as human beings. If you had a fight with your spouse that morning, or if your kids or something's going on with them that's not going well, you don't just turn that off and go to work and you're like some kind of robotic employee. And so we've been talking a lot more about when you see somebody that looks like they're kind of, you work together every day, you know each other well. If, reach out to them, check on them. If you know something's happened in their life that they could use just an encouraging word. We also have things that happen at our facilities that can be tough. I mean, we serve a very difficult population. Some of the people that we have in our hospitals, for example, have either been found not guilty by reason of insanity, or they're there because they've been found incompetent to stand trial. Some of them are violent. Um, so if a nurse gets assaulted at work, you know, we send them to the emergency room. Are you okay? And they were like, okay, well, report back the next day. And we put her right back in the same place that she was assaulted. Well, if you were attacked in an alley going down a street, and I said, Chester, I want you to go back to that alley tomorrow because you left your wallet and you need to go pick it up. Your first thought, you're going to have that traumatic response.
Yeah, I'm not doing that.
Exactly. And I think in general, I think we as a nation, probably as a world right now, are coming out of this trauma that we've experienced, whether it's pandemic, whether it's mass shootings, whether it's just the political wildness of the country. And whether you're a conservative or a liberal, that doesn't matter. Everybody's feeling it. There's this tension. That's where I think that it's important for us to realize people carry their trauma with them, and that's okay. That's normal. But that also means that we need to be sensitive to others when we're in meetings, when we're talking about patient care, when we're dealing with things on what may be going on with them. The bottom line is we're human, we're people. And for us to act like that we're just a job title or just an FTE or whatever doesn't get us anywhere. And so I try really to engage with staff heavily in order to do that. And if you'll indulge me, I want to tell one brief story. Back when I was in my previous position, I had about 11,000 employees. So I didn't have quite as many, but I had set up a texting service because we had a lot of staff that didn't have access to emails. And so I wanted to be able to get the word out to them because I would send mass emails out, and the social workers and the doctors and nurses would all get those emails. But if you're a maintenance guy out there working, in the field, or you're trying to fix things or whatever, you may not have email. So what I said is people can sign up on the texting service, and I'll answer. That's what I committed to. I will answer every text. And boy, did I get a bunch. And so when COVID hit, I had no idea that COVID was coming. When it hit, I had this direct line to these staff. And so we started doing giveaways. And one of the things that I would do is each week I would send out a question, just some goofy question, just to get people engaged. What's your favorite movie? If there was a movie about you, what style of movie would it be? Things like that. One week I sent out and said, if you had a time machine, what would you do? And I expected kind of the Back to the Future kind of responses. I'd go back and invest in Google, or I would get, lottery numbers or whatever. Well, people started pouring their hearts out. I would go back and hold my baby one more time that died when they were an infant. My dad and I had a huge fight, and he had a heart attack and died 2 days later, and we didn't get to make up. If I could just go back, and I'm reading these and I'm just sobbing. I mean, literally, I'm sitting on the couch, and my wife said, "You've got to stop reading them. They're killing you." And I said, "I know." And I said, "But these are people." I mean, that's when I thought these are people who every day have all these good and horrible things that happen. And so I really committed to responding to them and just being a listening ear. And one particular person, and they were all anonymous, so I didn't know who I was talking to. Her dad was in a nursing facility. He had dementia. She was afraid by the time COVID's over, he wouldn't even recognize her anymore. We talked all through COVID, probably 2 or 3 times a week. We would text back and forth. And so that to me was a huge eye opener into the fact that people they want to connect. They want to connect with people. And to me, that is one of the biggest things that I've learned in my career is those human connections are one of the number one ways that you can make your job better. You can make the atmosphere at your job better, and you can help people deal with anxiety. And because when you have a tough job, you can't make the toughness of the job go away, but you can help people feel supported so that they can manage it better.
I had the privilege of spending an entire day with your leadership group. And, one of the things you need to know about Scott as you're listening to this podcast is, and you can sense it, he really cares about his people and he engages. Now, the other thing is he also makes it really fun. That was one of the most fun days. I mean, a whole day of teaching is a long day, but the posters and the stuff and the giveaways and, you have that ability to bring some joy into the work as well, that human connection. You've talked about a lot of things that you do to help your people with their mental health, the town halls, the texting, the magazines and newsletters and so on. Is there anything else that you do to keep your people like mentally strong over and above the things you've talked about?
I think when we started the Together We Shine initiative, part of that was also to make sure that people locally were doing that support as well. And so we really pushed, for example, if you're a director or superintendent over one of our facilities, have town halls, let people have an opportunity to ask questions. To me, the number one thing that creates anxiety in the workforce is not feeling in control or not being sure what's coming. People don't, nobody likes that. And so having policies dictated from on high and you don't know why, or being told you're going to do things a certain way and you don't know why, to me, opening those lines of communication more so that people can ask questions in a safe environment and they can voice concerns, but also they can be a part of the solution. More than once I've said, we need to go to the staff that are doing the work and ask them, do you think this will work? Because I can come up with all these brilliant ideas in Austin, and then I send them out and people are saying, do you realize how much work it's going to take to do this? Right. and in the end, the payoff isn't going to be that much. And so it's really been about allowing people to have more of a voice in how they do their jobs and having more of a voice in being able to ask questions and be represented. And so we have employee councils that can meet, and they can meet with leadership, and they talk about concerns and issues. And it can be everything from how we schedule our shifts all the way up to, we have a patient that we really don't know what to do with and everybody's scared of them, and we're trying to figure out the best way to handle this. And so it really covers the broad range of work environment to the actual delivery of services.
Well, how do people learn more about you and your work, Scott? I'm assuming you don't want to give out your cell phone like you give to your employees.
Yeah. Just text him.
So, just text me. We're on the internet. If you Google Texas Health and Specialty Care System, then you're going to see the HHSC website, and that shows you, by the way, we're always hiring. So anybody listening to this, if you want to move to Texas, or if you're in Texas now, we are pretty much everywhere. We're all over the state, rural and urban. So that's one way is people can go to our website, and that really gives you the bigger picture. I have a personal podcast as well that I do that's unrelated to work. I don't advertise it at work because I don't want people to think I'm taking advantage of a captive audience, but that is another way if you want to get to know me on a personal level. And it's Observations from Life is the name of the podcast. It's really easy to find if you Google it.
Awesome.
Good.
We'll be checking it out, and this is fantastic. Okay, last question, since we're coming up on time here. This has been really great, Scott. Younger generations coming into the workplaces. We interviewed a lot for our book, Anxiety at Work. We heard a lot of younger people. They say, look, we talk about mental health in every conversation we have with each other. With you oldies, we never talk about it because you just don't get it. Obviously, you are. But what are you seeing kind of generally with the younger people coming into the workplace? What do we as leaders need to be aware of as we think about wellness and welcoming this new generation in?
I think most important is to listen. I think there's this, and unfortunately, it's become a social meme and everything else, and people have started integrating it into their beliefs. And that is that, for example, millennials, they don't really want to work, they do whatever. And the reality is that millennials are a very, very energetic and active group. And it's just what happens is, the millennials, and my kids are millennials, so I think I can speak for them. They grew up with like I grew up in my career. What it was is, if I want to do something, like if I want to one day be in some particular position, then I find somebody that is doing that now, kind of a mentor, and learn from them what they did and kind of the steps. And one day maybe I'll, make it to that level. Millennials grew up in a world where people like Mark Zuckerberg and you could name any of several, but where they, through creativity and ingenuity, became millionaires or billionaires maybe at this point. I don't know who's what, but so for them, they value that. They value being able to be creative and to be able to do things that are different and not just. So if you bring a millennial in and say, hey, I'm a unit director here at, such and such state hospital, and if you do like me 30 years, you too can, in 30 years, you too can be a millionaire and retire. They're not going to buy that. So what we've been trying to do is find ways. Can we move people around, change their jobs periodically? Can we give them other extra things that they may be interested in doing so that they can have some personal growth? I think that, and it's not just millennials, because now we're hiring Generation Z and others, but I think listening to them and recognizing that that we're the ones that used to think our parents didn't know anything. They now think we don't know anything. Let them tell us what they're seeking and what their goals are so that we can help tailor what we do to that. Because if you do that and somebody gets excited about it and feels that you've invested in them, it's a lot harder for them to want to leave because they now feel like they're part of that group. And so I can't stress enough, listen. And I often will be in a conversation with somebody that I already think I know everything, and I realize I need to just be quiet. I was doing a town hall one time where I was going to lay out all this information that I thought was really important. I had about 150 people in there, and I didn't get 3 minutes in, and they just started peppering me with everything from complaints to questions to whatever. And I had opened my town hall with, I'm here to listen. And they kept interrupting me. And then I thought, wait a minute. And I remember mentally telling myself, you said you're here to listen, just shut up. I did. And for an hour and a half, they talked, and a lot of it was complaints, and we did some problem solving live and other things. But it was kind of interesting because at the end I was thinking I didn't get to make any of the points I wanted to make, yet the feedback was that's one of the best town halls we've ever been in. And I realized they're not about me, it's about them, and that's what we need to do, is make it about them.
Well, I do want to make this next question about you because, so many people come to you, you answer all these texts, you're doing these podcasts and newsletters. What do you do to keep your energy good? What do you do to keep your mental health as you go through a lot? Your work is trauma. It really is.
It is. It is. Well, first of all, I think if anybody is wanting to deal with anxiety at work, first, make sure you're in a job you love. And if you're not, seek to find one. And I know it's not always easy. Sometimes you're just in the job you're in. But a phrase somebody told me years ago that I've always really believed in is bloom where you're planted. And so wherever I land, sometimes I haven't gotten the job I wanted, do the best I can in that job. But when it comes to outside of work, it is important that you've got a life, because if work is all you have and all you do, that means that your whole life is centered around deadlines and finishing projects and productivity. And sometimes I've often jokingly said I need to write a book one day called The Art of Doing Nothing, because sometimes you need to just do nothing. And so I find I like to meditate. That's a big thing for me. And so I really enjoy having time to, whether it's quiet, like a Zen Buddhist kind of meditation, or if it's with music. I sit in the backyard with my cats, which is if you ever watch cats pounce around or chase a bunny, that's a very relaxing thing to do. And I really enjoy that.
Catch it. Yeah.
Oh, they're fun. And I know there's dog people out there, and dogs are fine. But no, it's just, but also I think that I have a big family and I have kids and grandkids. We spend a lot of time together. I think that, again, it's about finding things that you enjoy. I like to dive into new things. And so about every 6 months to a year, I will start a new project. Like I'll start learning how to do something. For example, during COVID, when everything was shut down, I thought I'm going to learn how to be a bartender. And so I set up a whole bar. I took an online course. And then when the kids are over or whatever, by the way, my kids are in their 20s and 30s. When they were over, I could make mixed drinks and stuff. And that was just kind of a fun thing to do. Sometimes I dive into reading about stuff. I started a podcast for that very reason. I thought it would just be interesting to see where it goes, and it's kind of turned into kind of a spiritual journey for me. I love reading a lot of books about spirituality, a variety of them, whether it's Christianity or Buddhism or Hinduism or whatever. And so I think it's finding things that you enjoy that you can just kind of unplug and really just dwell in that. And I'm a big movie fan. I've got a movie. I go to a festival every year. It's here in Austin, so I don't have the stress of travel and everything else. But I have about a week and a half of just watching movies and hanging out with movie lovers. And so again, I think it's really, there's no magic trick to it. It's finding what you like, and it's being curious. I just get curious about things, and when I do, I deep dive into those for a while. And it's, for me, it's a way to help reduce stress, and it's just helps me to kind of have a balance. And sometimes I just put my hand down and on my desk, I bury my face in my hands, and I just think, go to your happy place for a minute, and then I kind of come back and everything's good.
Awesome.
Go to the movies. Yeah.
Yes.
Go to the movies. This has been just great, Scott. Thank you so much for taking some time with us. We've learned a lot. I've taken pages of notes, and it's obvious the care that you have for your people. Thank you so much for taking some time with us today on the Anxiety at Work podcast. And we wish you continued success in your role, taking care of 18,000 people, as well as all the people in your care that you take care of as well. Thank you for being on our podcast today, Scott.
Thank you.
It's been great, Scott. Thank you so much.
All right.
So, Adrian, what an engaging leader, loves what he does. He's bloomed where he's planted, so many great little tidbits about mental health and his staff. And so I'm curious, what were some of your big takeaways?
Well, first off, just a general observation. You have somebody like Scott who runs 18,000 person organization. It's interesting that sometimes you meet people like that. The higher up you kind of get in an organization, the more interesting people get.
Right.
Movie buff spends a week and a half at a movie, at a festival. They just have interesting hobbies. They're curious about the world. So just a little takeaway there for all of us is, if you want to be successful, be more curious in life, like Scott. So I just thought, first off, let's talk, trauma from the pandemic. He says, look, his hospitals, they're full, but it's more than that. Is we lost a lot of our connections. We've talked about this during the pandemic. So mental health professionals are serving that role where normally you would just put your problem out to your friends as you're having, breakfast with friends or dinners, which we stopped doing during COVID, which we kind of need to start again.
Yeah. I was just so impressed with his commitment to communication. Magazines, town halls, podcasts, newsletters, the texting service that he gave away his mobile phone number, that he wanted to be connected, to your point, those human connections. Talked about the town hall where he came in and it was about listening, and he had all these points he wanted to make, and then he sat back and listened. It was the best town hall they'd ever had. I also appreciated when he said, look, for himself, continue to have a life, do something above and beyond. If your life is just work, it's all deadlines and stress and so on. Be curious, go to movies, pick up a habit, open a bar in your basement. I mean, he really had fun. And his family, you could tell that was very important to him, his children and his grandchildren.
Well, that was an interesting story about doing 11 and a half hours of hostage negotiation.
Yeah.
And who's the first person you call? Well, it's your family. And the point was there, after trauma, we need stability. Well, and coming back to the workplace, this is anxiety at work. We can be more of the stability for our people if there is trauma, which there's going to be outside in their lives. So I just thought that was really interesting, that talk about trauma that Scott talked about. Look, everybody's going through this right now, especially younger people who can't get away from it on their phones, etc. Mass shootings, the pandemic, politics. People carry trauma with them, and that we've got to be more sensitive than ever before to those around us. Is somebody struggling?
Absolutely. His podcast, Observations from Life, something he was curious about, and now is, getting out there and doing a bunch of stuff. Scott Shacklin spent a whole day with he and his leadership team. Let me tell you something. You can tell when people admire and want to be like their leader, and his people admire and really care for Scott as much as he cares for them. Not surprisingly, when you get a leader that cares that much, that it would be reciprocated. Scott Shacklin, one of our more interesting leaders that we've ever encountered. Wouldn't you
Isn't
agree?
it interesting that you went out and spoke to the leaders of a group of psychiatric hospitals? I recently did that, spoke to another national chain of psychiatric hospitals. Here we are going out and speaking to all these psychiatric professionals, but I think it's interesting. They're looking for different ways and different perspectives as well, seeing us come in with a business perspective and a little bit of the psychology we talk about. And, it's interesting. We're all looking for new ideas, no matter where we are.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up another great podcast, we always want to give thanks to our producer, Brent Klein, who takes all the stuff that we send him and makes it audible and interesting, to Christy Lawrence, who helps find our amazing guests, and of course, to all of you that listen in. If you like the podcast, please share it. We'd love to visit our website, thecultureworks.com, for some free resources to help you and your team and your culture thrive.
And we love speaking to audiences around the world, like Chester did for Scott's group, virtually or in person, on the topics of wellness, culture, teamwork, resilience. So give us a call. We'd love to talk to you about your event. And this has been another fun podcast. Chester, I'm going to give you the last word this time.
Thank you. Well, buy our books, as Adrian said, and we have a new book. One of our strategies is around gratitude. We just published The Gratitude Habit. Go to our website, thecultureworks.com, and order your book now. It's 90 Days to a More Grateful Life. And on that, grateful for you, as always, Adrian, and for all of the people that listen. Have a great week, and we'll see you again in 7. Cheers.